stand to talk?
I'll probably stand at the lectern.
Yes.
If that's...
All right. Let me just... Hello, welcome to Mansfield College for the first in this term's series of principals talks, and this evening is a special lecture. It's our annual Hands lecture, which we give to celebrate and thank Guy and Julia Hands for the very considerable and generous support that they've given Mansfield over very many years, Guy being one of our most distinguished alumni. This evening's lecture is joins a long line of very interesting and distinguished lecturers, from Bob Geldof to Lord Heseltine, who managed not to be snowed off last year, but only just. But this year we're very pleased to have as our lecturer Colette Bowe, Dame Colette Bowe, who is newly appointed, about to become a member of the Financial Policy Committee of the Bank of England. But this is only the latest in a string of posts in a very long and distinguished career from Whitehall to the City, and the role which she's going to speak about this evening as Chairman of the UK Banking Standards Board. So we're very pleased to have Colette talking about the way you can embed standards and cultures in banking and financial institutions. And after that we'll have a conversation, some short observations from Guy, and we can open it up to a conversation from the floor. So thank you very much, Colette, for giving this year's lecture.
Thank you very much indeed, Helen, and thank you for that introduction. It's a great pleasure to be here at Mansfield College, and I'm delighted to be giving the Hands lecture, and I'm particularly delighted to have had the opportunity a little before we began this evening to have a chat with Guy, and he and I will be having a bit of an exchange at the end of this, which we hope will make it for an even more interesting than usual Q&A session. So that is how we're going to do this. I'm going to begin by asking you all a question. Do you trust me? Well, you might be thinking, we probably trust her. She looks more or less like a professional person. Looks probably as if she knows what she's talking about. She's been around the City of London for quite a while. So she probably knows about banks. So yeah, Now, all of that is true, yes? Been around, know about banks, all of that. But it doesn't tell you anything about why I might be worthy of being trusted, does it? So, let's go back now to the dramatic days of 2008-9, which most of us, I guess, remember all too well. Those dramatic days when the banking system, not only here but in the Western world, trembled on what felt like the brink of collapse. Reams have been written about what happened, why it happened, what ought to be done to make sure it doesn't happen again. There's been a very strong response here in the UK in terms of law and regulation. A particularly interesting development here in the UK has been the introduction of something called the senior managers regime, which makes senior individuals in banks and other financial institutions personally responsible and accountable for specific actions. And the regulators, both in the UK and throughout the world, have put an immense amount of effort into overhauling the requirements for stability, for operational control of financial entities, and for clarifying and sharpening the requirements for how people in these institutions carry out their responsibilities. So, is that enough then? Can we all now sleep easy in our beds at night? Well, one of the indicators that we can't all say, job done, is the fact that even now, situations are emerging, problems are emerging, issues are still coming up, still being dealt with, which to me seems symptomatic of the fact that there may be some deeper malaise here. And where that thought takes us is to a consideration of whether, despite all the regulatory activity that I've sort of briefly touched on there, the underlying culture of major financial institutions may actually have not changed. I just use the word culture. Now, that can be a bit of a difficult word. There are various key concepts that people use when they're talking about underlying culture. People talk about ethics. People talk about purposes. In the banking world, people talk about the social license of banking. And all these discussions, all these concepts have been developed to very good effect. But there's also been another and parallel dialogue. And that's about how exactly those who work in and lead banks can again make the banking system worthy of trust. One of the most interesting developments in the long train of things that happened after the financial crisis here in the UK was an inquiry undertaken by both Houses of Parliament into what had happened and why. It was called the Parliamentary Commission on Banking Standards. One of its many recommendations, and I'm going to just paraphrase this here a bit, was that those who lead banks should themselves take on responsibility for ensuring that the organizations that they lead embody and act in accordance with high standards of conduct. So the people who are there in positions of authority and leadership should be taking responsibility. In other words, not just responding to legal or regulatory pressures, not just responding to regulatory changes, but actually taking personal responsibility quite out with those legal and regulatory requirements. In 2014, a number of our biggest banks and our biggest building society got together in response to this recommendation from the Parliamentary Commission to see if they themselves could devise a way of holding up a mirror to themselves as banks to say, this is what the culture of your business is actually like. And those 7 big institutions decided that what they needed was an organization, a something that would take on the job of doing this. They didn't really know what they wanted that organization to be like or anything else. They just knew what they wanted it to do, to hold up this mirror. I was then appointed, as it happens by the Governor of the Bank of England, to create this body, which I then did over a period of months, with the support of my colleague, Alison Cottrell, our Chief Executive, who's here tonight and who's sitting in the front row. And I'm delighted you're here, Alison, not least because you can answer all the difficult questions that will no doubt come up in the Q&A session, as usual, you know, our usual deal. There we were, we set up this organisation, completely blank sheet, which is actually one of the most interesting things that you can have in a working life. No statute behind it, by the way. It's a totally voluntary initiative. Three important things have driven our work. One is the major insight that we owe to our board colleague. We put together a board of people who have prominence in our public life. I can talk a little bit more later, if you like, about who those people are and what they've contributed. But one of our major contributors was Honora O'Neill, who many of you in this room will know as a most distinguished philosopher. And she joined our board to help us steer this project. And she taught us all to understand something, which is that you can't ask for trust. You can't say, trust me. You can't demand people trust you. You have to make yourself worthy of it. The second thing that drove us was to make a connection between trustworthiness and the fundamental culture, fundamental characteristics of a trustworthy business. The culture of a business determines what happens in it. Statement of the obvious, but it means you can't outsource it. You can't say, oh, well, the regulators are taking care of that. Somebody else is taking care of that. You cannot outsource that. The third thing that we developed as a thought fairly quickly was there's no one single good culture. Obviously, many of the banks and building societies that we work with have quite different business models. We have, for example, a number of big mutual building societies, and at the sort of other end of the spectrum, we have people like HSBC, a massive global bank. So there are different business models, different ways of doing business. Business cultures differ partly on the kind of business you are, the kind of business you're in. But we maintain that all good business cultures have some things in common, whatever the culture might be. And the definition of what those things in common are has been the core to the work that's been carried on now for 4 years by this organization we set up, which is called the Banking Standards Board. As I've said, this is a completely non-statutory body. It's a voluntary initiative. Nobody's forced to join it. Nobody's going to get enforcement action if they don't join it. It's a very interesting concept. It has a board which consists of some people who are prominent in our public life, like Honora O'Neill. Another board colleague we have is Brendan Barber, the former director of the TUC. And it includes a number of senior practitioners from the industry. This body doesn't lobby. We never lobby on behalf of banks. We don't regulate. What we do is we aim to help boards of businesses develop a deep understanding of the drivers of the culture of their business, leading to results that are in some ways not at all obvious. I would just say at this point, having spoken for a moment about the fact that this is a non-statutory voluntary body, when Alison and I began this project, we thought to ourselves a body set up like that was in some ways a peculiarly British phenomenon. And I'm sure lawyers in the room will be thinking, well, yeah, non-statutory, okay. And maybe you've got to be British in some way to make something like this work. And for quite a long time, I thought that that was the case. Very interestingly, however, other countries are now looking at what has happened here in the UK and what's been achieved through this board. And in other countries, people are starting to say, maybe we could do something like that, and have started to come to the Banking Standards Board to ask for help to develop something similar. And last year we worked with the Irish banks and authorities to set up a completely separate but a body that strongly resembles the UK Banking Standards Board but works with the Irish banks. That's the first of the bodies that has, if you like, learned from how this can be made to work. And there are others in the pipeline. So, going back to what makes for any good culture, well, after quite a lot of research, we concluded that there are a number of core characteristics of trustworthiness. They are shared purpose, honesty, competence, reliability, responsiveness, personal and organizational resilience, accountability, openness, respect. And the second conclusion we arrived at was that, and this is really important, these characteristics are susceptible to quantitative analysis. And I'd like to emphasize that point. I'm going to describe a bit more about how we've done this. Because when we began, a lot of people said, in effect, oh yeah, well, culture, yeah, that's okay. It's one of those soft things, isn't it? And we're sure you'll give us a report about what our culture is like. And you could almost feel people thinking, yeah, that's probably, you know, all about have we got vegan options in the canteen and stuff like that, you know. And people have been rather surprised by the fact that the version of this that we have come up with is, as I will show, susceptible to quantitative analysis. So how do we do this? Well, we designed a survey. It's not one of the surveys you can buy off the shelf from the many actually very reputable firms that do this, but we designed it ourselves with the help of academic ethnographers. And this survey, which is done on a voluntary basis by people working for the banks, ascertains the views about people working in these businesses, but is organized, the answers are organized along the dimensions of the 9 things I mentioned a moment ago, ranging from shared purpose through to respect. And all of this has enabled us to conduct over 3 or 4 years now analysis of the culture of the banks. What are we learning for each bank that does this survey, whose colleagues do this survey, about what this is telling them about their culture? How far and how fast are they traveling along that long and winding road that I mentioned in my title? Now, we've recently published the results of our most recent survey, which covered more than 72,000 people working in the banking industry, which makes it by far the largest survey of any, I think even any such survey of any industry, but certainly of this industry. All available on our website, so I won't try and race through the results, which are quite complex, quite interesting, and which, if you're really interested in either banking or organizational culture or both, you might well find really worth a dive into. So I'm not going to try and give you the quick summary of that. I thought I would just mention some of the kind of things that come up out of this survey, some of the flavor. People have talked to us through the survey about whether they think the senior leaders in their business are actually credible, whether they're taking responsibility. They've talked about whether they feel able to speak up about what's going on in their working environment. And this, by the way this is designed, distinguishes between speak up about things that are about certain kinds of behavior, harassment, bullying, etc., etc., but also about whether you feel that actually you could do the business slightly differently if you just did this. You know, ideas about things. And we say to people, well, you know, if X happened, either you were on the receiving end of some bad behavior or you might have had a good idea. Did you actually say anything about it? And people say either yes or no. If yes, well, what happened? And if no, the answer is usually, well, you know, I thought it might have adverse consequences for me. Or, you know what, I thought nothing would happen if I raised it. Fear or futility. And that is one of the most startling results for boards that comes out of this work. That, you know, boards and senior executives can feel that they're running a very open organization and people are talking to them about what matters, and then they get a result that says, you know what, we didn't think we were going to raise this because we didn't think anything would happen. Another sort of thing that people talk to us about is about how working at the firm has had a negative effect on their health and well-being. Again, this is something that doesn't come up very often in such surveys, but an alarmingly large number of people report real pressures on them, and again, an anxiety about mentioning and raising the fact that they might be having mental health problems because they feel that will have an adverse effect on them. Our survey shows that perceptions of equality of opportunity between men and women in a firm are extremely influenced by the leadership, or on the negative side, the lack of leadership shown by people at senior levels in the business. And again, that sounds like a statement of the obvious, but it means people have to carry through the kind of things that they say. In general, looking right across the sector, the results of our most recent survey show that after a couple of years of the generality of firms making good progress, they seem to have slowed down, or even in some cases just sort of reached a plateau. Now, is this a cause for concern? In my rather cautious view, I would say that this shows that changing the deep-seated drivers of business culture is a very long job, and that the industry as a whole is now in the hard yards of making real change happen. That's why I call this talk The Long and Winding Road. This isn't an easy job. It isn't a straightforward job. Am I pessimistic then? No. The very fact that this initiative that has led to this project has been undertaken by the leaders of the UK banking industry and is now, as I've said, being emulated in some other jurisdictions, that gives me some hope. I want to finish this talk, however, on a rather cautionary note about some upcoming developments. This relates to the increasingly widespread use of artificial intelligence. Going back to where I began this talk with the financial crisis, there is a fairly well-settled view that the complexity that was revealed in that crisis was both a cause of the crisis and a factor that exacerbated its scale. What do I mean by that? I mean that innovation had led to the development of complex structured products that few people at the time really fully understood. The financial system itself had become very highly interconnected with many feedback loops. And owing to this complexity and interrelationships, when parts of the system came under stress, The effects were transmitted widely. Homogeneity was also a factor. Many of you will know Andy Haldane, the chief economist of the Bank of England. And Andy Haldane has said, within the financial sector, diversity appears to have been reduced for two separate but related reasons. One is the pursuit of return and the management of risk. I beg your pardon. One is the pursuit of return, the other is the management of risk. In consequence, the financial system became less disease resistant. When environmental factors changed, the homogeneity of the financial ecosystem increased materially its probability of collapse. So that's the Andy Haldane account of the consequences of the extreme complexity that had been engineered into the system, that had reduced its immunity to, its resistance to bad things happening. Now, it doesn't take much of a mental leap to imagine some of these risks to which Andy was referring being manifested in the development of new algorithmic technologies. The models are complex and they require specialist knowledge to understand. Now, I raise this issue here briefly because it seems to us that it's already presenting further complex challenges to the evolution of good culture in the banking industry. A better understanding of the role of technology in banking, aided by what we already know about banking culture, would, we think, equip firms in the industry with a better understanding of risk and how to address these risks so as not to repeat some of the mistakes of the past. As I've said, my title tonight reflects the view that the reform of banking culture is a long and difficult job. It's got to be undertaken by those who lead and manage financial institutions. Why bother? Bother because it matters. Trust in banking is one of the fundamentals of a free society. If we lose that, we lose something immeasurably precious. So we need our banks to become, once again, worthy of trust. Thank you very much.
I've spotted that there are only two chairs, so when Guy's made whatever remarks he wants to make, if he goes there and has a conversation, I will then spot questions and bring them back.
Do you want to come and sit, Guy, or do you want to? Are you better standing up? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. That was absolutely wonderful. I thought I'd just give a few words on my experience in banking over the last since 1982. And sort of bring it back. And I think, Colette said, is banking worthy of trust? And I think that's probably one of the most interesting things is because over the last, really since probably Big Bang, what banking has looked at is compensation. And it's become more and more focused purely on compensation. And I've never seen that there's any connection between what people are paid and their trustworthiness. And the reality is, if you went back to sort of 82 when I worked at Goldman, what I was told at Goldman when I joined was, we're here to serve the customer, we're here to serve society. If we get paid well, that's great, but that's a secondary element. And that was Whitehead and Weinberg. And that was the speech he gave us when we joined, the two of them gave us. You're the brightest, you're the cleverest, you've got the best opportunity, but you're here to serve society. Bob Rubin came in, extremely bright, and working with McKinsey's, started to change the culture. And the culture was on the profit motive. And it wasn't that we're there to serve society, they were there to make as much money for the bank as we possibly could, within the limits of legal regulation. And as long as we weren't breaking the law, nothing else mattered. And that is a huge cultural shift. You're switching from a role in society to the profit motive. And I think one of the questions I would ask and discuss is the profit motive actually the right way for a bank to run, which has a global or national presence? Or is it the wrong thing? And what do we really want out of our banks? Because regulation can do some things, but culture will do far more. And the reality is the bankers that Goldman hired, the people that Goldman hired, were the cleverest and brightest people of their generation. And I say that with no false modesty. They're out there, they're running governments, they're all over the place. And Goldman's probably the most extreme, but other banks were out there as well. I mean, it's JP Morgan. And somebody recently said to me that war is the devil's playground. I think finance is the devil's temptation. The reality is, if you really want to make a lot of money, finance is probably the easiest place to make it. It is quite extraordinary how one can use one's brain in finance to make lots of money. And often in finance, people purely focus on that profit motive. Culture changes are very slow. I would say Goldman moving from seeing its place as being part of society to Goldman seeing its place as being purely about producing profit probably took 20 to 30 years. And going the other way would take 20 to 30 years if you do it incrementally. I buy businesses and try and change their culture very quickly. But the businesses I buy aren't going to risk the financial stability. And I never find in those businesses I can change that culture without actually really doing something. We had a financial services business. We've actually had a number. But we had one, and we used the survey, very similar, but not probably as good, that McKinsey's produced, the occupational health thing. And one of our businesses, when we did that survey, came out as 4th quartile in terms of cultural values. Absolutely appalling, except for one area. 94% of the people working there thought they were well paid. Normally it's about 33%. 94% they felt they were well paid, and 89% thought the incentive structure was good. But their trust level of their senior management was less than 20%. We're not a government, we're not a public company. We can do something with that. And we did. We fired the CEO. We actually fired, of the 4 senior people, 3 of them. But it left us with a problem. We had a very profitable business with, frankly, a horrible culture, a disgusting culture, a repulsive culture. And we sold it. The people who bought it are still trying to deal with that culture. And they have the question about, and this is the question, do they continue to focus on the profit motive for their shareholders, or do they take a step back and solve the culture? Now that's a financial service business in aircraft leasing. It's not going to break the trust in society. It's not going to change how people act in society. the banking community does change that. And I suppose I would say that I think Colette's 100% right, but I think it's a problem that if unless Western democracy works out how we deal with it, it's going to break our society, and what happened last time will be nothing like what happens this next time, particularly if banks will be able to use artificial intelligence to do all sorts of things. And if you want to see a country which has changed the culture of its banking system, and I'm not saying they've done it for the best reasons, Soros would say it's the most evil system in the world, it's China. In China, banking in 2012, 90% of lending went to the private sector, net lending. And the view of the guy at the top when he got in was, that's not serving our society. I want to serve our society. Today it's net about 5%. He's moved the resources of what the banking does towards society and away from the private sector. Now you can say that's good or you can say it's bad, but it shows you can make the changes if you want to. So I would just stop there, just hopefully those sort of hit some other questions about how you do this and where it goes, but it is absolutely crucial to society to get it right. And if you don't sort of believe that, look at the Renaissance. And the reason the Renaissance existed, which was because the populace had lost confidence in its bankers. And the church said, as bankers, unless you reform, you're all going to go to hell. And the way the bankers dealt with that was they gave lots of money to the church, which became art and the Renaissance. Probably wasn't quite what the church expected or meant, but the actual effect was quite a change in society. Thank you.
Looks as if I'm being offered a chair, but I think I may as well just lurk in the corner and take questions from other people.
Good joke.
I'm going to abuse my position here anyway and ask whether you think, you talked about profitability and culture, or the profit motive and culture, and you sound as if they were in opposition. Do you think they need to be in opposition?
I don't think culture and profit motive are in opposition. They can be absolutely aligned. The question of whether it's the right culture. So one of the most successful private equity firms out there has an annual prize for the biggest snake in the firm, because they basically reward the ability to leg over the other side. And so they literally look for who is most successful this year and who's done it the best. Now, it makes a lot of profit, but is it very good for society? So culture doesn't have to be good, it can be bad or good.
Yep.
The question is, how do you get culture which serves society if you totally focus on the profit motive?
I suppose I meant, can you have a good culture and a profit motive?
Yeah, and I think you can have, I think the issue is, where do you have your limit? If you purely take the brightest people in society and say make as much money as you can, you get the issues we've got with Facebook and the issues we have with the banking system, and probably the next one, or in the medical industry, of course, the opiate. 800,000 people in America, they reckon, have died for over-prescription of opiates. And you have drug companies have gone out and paid doctors by commission to prescribe opiates. Now, that is a big issue for society. And the problem with that is you then have, if I was in the States, would I go to an American doctor today with a disease, when I know that the chances are he's getting paid by some drug company to give me a drug? I certainly wouldn't.
Okay. Well, I've got a possibly a slightly different take on this guy. I don't think that there's any necessary inconsistency between a firm seeking to make a profit for its shareholders and running a good business. Any more, by the way, than I think there's any necessary good thing about a firm that doesn't have shareholders. I mean, as we know, some of the people in this industry are mutuals. They don't have shareholders. Well, we have seen some appalling scandals that have emerged in this industry, in businesses that are run as mutual businesses. No profit motive at all, but the culture was still very wrong. So I would say you can, of course, in my view, yes, of course, the pursuit of profit is a perfectly legitimate, respectable thing, and you have got to combine it with making sure that the people working in the firm know what the boundaries are. And second, and this is something we haven't touched on at all tonight, the ultimate owners of these businesses have got to start to step up. Now, we haven't talked about that at all. What do I mean by the ultimate owners? I mean the people who own primarily the shares in the banks. And for the most part, they're not individuals like you and me. They are big investment funds. And one of the things I have been saying more and more frequently, guys, since we got into this project is, isn't it time that those who own the banks, the big investment funds, big asset managers, start to say to the management of banks, this is how we expect this business that we own to be run. This is how we expect you to serve your clients and your customers. This is how we expect remuneration to be tied to the kind of behaviours that we want to see. That's been a bit of an absent element in all of this debate, actually. But to my mind, it's just starting to become more of an issue. And I think some of the big investment businesses are now coming to getting a grip on their responsibilities as fundamental owners of the businesses. So I would say the two things, pursuit of profit and a good culture aren't inconsistent. Of course, you know, there are always places that are run solely for the benefit of the people who are working there, but that doesn't mean everywhere is.
Yeah, no, and I apologise if people thought I meant that. I don't think they're inconsistent, but the more you focus purely on profit, the more you've got to have a good culture.
Yeah.
And the more significant the industry is to society,
Yeah.
which medicine and banking are incredibly significant, the more important it is to have that good culture. The shareholder issue is incredibly important. And a lot of people would say private equity, which is my business, doesn't necessarily do good, whereas public companies do good. My experience is exactly the reverse. In private equity, your name, either personally or the company, is on the line the whole time. Lots of big companies with shareholders hide behind that shareholder thing. We're doing it for the shareholder. We're just an investor.
Yeah.
And you
I
have
get
that with the Church of England, with its payday loan scheme. You know, what logically is the Church of England doing, investing in that? And so your point about the shareholders is incredibly important. And the responsibility in private equity, and their deals we just will not do.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to be associated with them.
Yeah.
And they're things we wouldn't allow our management teams to do. And I think it is about that personalisation. And the reality is that personalisation, pre-globalisation, was quite close.
Yep.
You know, if you have a German Mittelstand company which is based in Frankfurt and works in Frankfurt, the guy wants to walk down the street and not have people spit at him. You know, yes, he wants to earn money, but the social acceptability is probably worth as much. If you've got somebody sitting in Chicago running a business in Frankfurt and he never goes there, he's just going to say, well, I've got to work for my shareholders.
Yeah.
And he doesn't care what happens.
Yeah. And that's all very fair comment, Guy. The thing I would say, however, is if we think about the UK banking sector, and I would like to emphasise, we're talking about the whole lot here, not just the big global businesses, but actually the many businesses that are much more regionally focused here in the UK, who do that thing that the Landesbanken have traditionally been so good at in Germany, of really knowing their local customers. There's an awful lot of good stuff that goes on in the UK banking sector. And I think it's really important to try to drill down into why is it good? What makes it work? You know, and people understanding, as I was saying to you earlier, something that you can best express, in my view, by saying, this is how we do it round here. You know, this is how we do it. And people stepping up and taking responsibility.
You're 100% right. And it actually comes totally and completely from the top. It comes from the culture that's put out there by the CEO. And the problem with traditional, when you look as a shareholder, you purely look at what's the profit produced. You don't look at how. And your survey, which is what we get our companies to do, is really important. And there has to be consequences. And if we find bad cultures, it doesn't matter how profitable the business is, we're going to get rid of the person. But very few shareholders have the guts to do that. And there are cases after cases of companies which have been really appalling for years, but because they've been making enough profit, the shareholders are very happy. Rather than actually saying, how are they making that profit and is it appropriate? And your point is completely correct. Shareholders have to step up and take much more responsibility, or the government has to, and the government doing it, I don't believe the government can do it. So it's really, the reality is it's about the responsibility of society as shareholders to say it matters. And I can never remember the name of the film. There's that wonderful film of the banker.
The Wolf of Wall Street?
No, the one in the 30s, where they got the depression.
Oh, where the angel comes to rescue. Yes,
Wonderful Life.
A Wonderful Life, the one we all watch on Christmas afternoon.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, you see, that's a good morality story of good and bad banking.
Yeah.
And the community. And
Right.
of course, with a little angel in there as well.
Right. Are there any questions from the floor? Yes, there's one just here. It's just a microphone just coming.
And please, because I don't know all our guests here tonight, I'd be really grateful if you would tell me who you are.
Right, thank you. Parveen Kumar, I'm a doctor. Dame Colette, you started off with the word trust. And as a doctor, obviously, this means enormous amount. And I think trust in society, at least, I think society has lost trust in just about anything. And I'm sure that's the cause of the populism that we've had rising up, because there's a lack of trust. Now, is it culture that produces a lack of trust, or is it the institutions? Now, the banking world had a huge problem a few years ago, and immediately the trust in the banking system fell. Every time a doctor makes a mistake, it's obviously rebelled in the newspapers, and that trust relationship, the doctor-patient relationship, is actually lost. And we're having mega problems with this. But really, the question I want to ask you is, trust is so important. And you said culture and trust could live together. And I wondered how you thought that might happen.
The way I would answer that is to just sort of spell out a sort of chain, which is to say, yes, the banking industry, I think, did lose people's trust. You know, nobody who was there at the time will easily forget the sight of people queuing outside the doors of Northern Rock. Remember that? That was the first precursor of the crisis, the autumn of 2007, and people having their first inkling that a major institution could fail. And that was a moment, I think, when sort of trust in the banking system began to dissipate. And then, of course, it was exacerbated by what happened. The second link in this sort of chain of argument goes, well, yes, the bank's saying, let's try and rebuild trust. But our saying back to them, well, you've got to show that you're worthy of trust. You can't just say, oh, well, we're going to rebuild trust by, being good guys, and everybody knows we're good guys. You've got to show that you are worthy of it. Now, there's lots of ways you can do that. So the third link in the chain comes from not simply going out there and saying, trust us now, but actually doing all these difficult, time-consuming things that we've talked about, which are about establishing the kind of culture with the kind of characteristics I mentioned, those 9 things, that if you can get those things working and get them right, will mean you have developed a culture that makes you worthy of trust. But the really important thing that I'm wanting to argue tonight is you can't just say, trust me, and people will say, yeah, okay then. I think the difference with medicine, and this is an important one, I think, is there is an enormous asymmetry of information between the doctor and the patient. And we have to rely on your professional knowledge, training, and experience, because we simply can't understand what might be a medical problem. There's a huge asymmetry there. If we look across into the financial world, quite often there is, to some extent, an asymmetry of information. If I'm wanting to do something a bit complicated, like a financial transaction, I will need advice. But there is much less asymmetry of information. So I'm not so incentivized to trust somebody in financial services as I have to be to trust a doctor such as yourself, because there is no way I can equalize the relationship, the professional relationship between you. I have to trust you, and I have to feel that in general your profession is trustworthy. And I understand what you're saying, that there might come a point for your profession when there are sufficient failures and publicized failures that public trust in your profession begins to decline, which would be a catastrophe for us. I don't think we're anywhere near that, by the way.
No, but, society, in fact, dictates what we do in every way, particularly in medicine. In Renaissance times, there was also an implicit trust between the patient and the doctor. And the doctor had no tools. But now we have a lot of tools, and we have the media. And I think it's perhaps the media that's really taking us away from actually an implicit trust in you, because the media will tell you not only about the doctors, but also about the various investigations that you can do. And they will tell you what they want. And I feel that breaking down of the trust possibly makes us all worse, I'm not sure, worse at our jobs.
Well, I have to, this is taking us into a slightly different area. I have to say, I personally would never blame the media. What the media does is report and reflect. If we're losing trust, it's because we know things that we didn't previously know. You can't blame the media for publicizing failures and shortcomings. But Guy, I don't know whether you feel like that.
Well, no,
Maybe you feel more negative about the media than I do.
No, I don't feel negative about the media in that way. I think we're going through a technological change. When we moved from priests having the Bible and no printed Bible and having it in Latin and being able to tell their congregation what they should believe, the people had no real power. They had no ability. As soon as you had the printed Bible and as soon as you put it into the local languages, all of a sudden the populace could question. And that questioning led to a breakdown of the Catholic Church in Europe. We have 300 years of really unpleasant times as the Church fought to keep its power and as it had to deal with a completely different situation. You had pamphlets being printed in Florence, pointing out that certain priests had, 12 illegitimate children, etc., etc. People questioned the popes. People questioned God. that led to a whole hundreds of years of problems. But the technology was there. There's nothing you could do about it. The internet is there. As a doctor, you know, you're going to have patients who will simply Google everything before they come and see you, and they will doubt you. And as a banker, they'll go on and they'll look at different things.
Yeah.
And they'll read up that JP Morgan has done this corruption there, and they'll say, why should I trust you? As a politician, you know, it's a technological change. I don't think we can blame the media for it.
No.
And that technological change will bring good and bad. Today, would we like the printing press never to have existed and no one to have been educated? Of course not. But did it cause a lot of pain? Enormous. Is the internet causing a lot of pain? Yes. Is it causing populism? Yes. Is it going to take us a long time to get through it? I hope it's not 300 years. And I hope we don't burn people at the stake. But the reality is, ISIS is largely a creation of it. So we are burning people at the stake. We're not burning as many people as they did in the Middle Ages, but who knows? And so it's just technology brings good and bad. And we're trying to work out how we deal with that bad.
Yeah.
But I'm not quite where Facebook is, that all information should be given to everyone, and that's a good thing. That I don't believe. I think information has to be given responsibly. But I do tend to believe that giving people more information, providing better education and better transparency is a good thing. And if the reality is that because of the internet now people do understand some of the issues with banking, so be it.
We're all for it, yeah. And, you know, people will get things wrong and they won't necessarily understand everything, but I'm with you on this, Guy. I think, you know, the technology is, you know, it's potentially a great force for better human understanding.
Yeah, and this sounds very strange because I'm not religious, but I'm with the current Pope on this.
Guy, you've just said you're not religious, but I have to say, you've talked about the Renaissance, you've talked about Martin Luther, you're now saying you're with the current Pope. I think we're all beginning to think, is Guy about to come out and tell us about
He's
his
a product
religious
of a non-conformist
conversion?
college.
Just mentioned one of your friends who has wife with 5 children suddenly discovered from moving us from Verve Pico to the church.
Yeah.
And she left him. I mean, my wife might leave me with 4 children if I suddenly fell out of the church. But yeah, the Pope has finally apologised for what the Catholic Church did. And once you apologise and you accept that you're vulnerable, that you're not omniscient, life becomes a lot easier. And once banks accept, they make mistakes.
Yeah, which they have done. Let's be very clear about this. The very fact that this thing I've been talking to you about tonight exists, this Banking Standards Board, is the leaders of this industry saying, listen, we've got to do things better because we know we did not get things right. And that's real concrete, you know, evidence on the ground, actually. I think we ought to move on from religion, however, Guy.
Yes.
Get back to banking.
We have the blood scandal. And that, actually admitting there was mistakes there, it increases people's trust because they say they're not going to cover up behind it. And I think we're going to have to learn we're in a world where if you do something wrong, it's probably going to come out. Whereas in the past, the establishment could hide it. It's very, very difficult to hide it today.
Okay, we've probably got time
Agreed.
for 2 or 3 more questions. I'm going to take them together, and then, so there's one there, and one there, and one there. Oh, okay, I'm going to take 4, okay. Depends how many you've got time for.
Right.
Let me just start with these
Heather,
3, these first 3.
you tell us about how much time we've got.
Yes. Well, I'll just take 3 and then we'll see how it goes. So there's one, you were in number 3, and then this lady here. So, well, why don't we start there? You start there. No, start with you. You've got the microphone. So, yes.
It's my turn. Thank you very much. I'm from China. Just as you mentioned, there's something happening in our country. I'm from China Construction Bank, which is the 2nd largest bank in China. I think you know that. In this year, we launched a campaign to establish so-called labor harbor in every outlet. Our bank have more than 13,000 outlets, branches in all over the country. And the harbor can offer some services to the public, such as we offer water, toilet, and microwaver, and also a very comfortable sofa for the cleaner or for the taxi driver. This is a new thing. I think this is a change in terms of culture. But on the other hand, we come across some obstacle, because in the market, it's not every competitor, I mean every bank, will do the same thing. So we have to use some energy to serve the society, but we have to use more energy to compete to our competitors. This is a problem. So my question is, how do we balance the relationship between the competition and the service society? I think it's not a very easy problem. Can be solved in the near future. It's the reality, but we want to balance them. This is my question. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to take a couple more. So if you could have a microphone just here, please. And then there's one here.
Thank you so much to both of you for your talks. They were super interesting. I'm a PhD student here. I'm researching on gender equality, or rather the lack thereof, in finance. And I'd be very keen on your thoughts. What are key drivers for cultural change? Because you talked about changing senior leaders and whether that's successful or not. And I am particularly interested because I recently conducted a number of interviews in New York. And from a diversity perspective, what all of my respondents said, that whether a bank is well capitalized or not is really essential in whether they can launch diversity initiatives. So that kind of also comes back to the profit aspect, that they're actually very much linked. If a bank has enough money, they can actually launch these kind of thoughts. So like, what are the key drivers for this necessary cultural change in finance?
Okay.
And then the last one in this section should be here.
Thanks. The reason I was playing with my phone is I was looking at your
Sorry,
survey.
David, can't quite hear you.
The reason I was looking at my phone is that I was looking at your survey, Colette, which looks very good. But I'm going to make a very obvious and traditional argument against you, because there's been far too much agreement here. Isn't this just PR? You know, isn't this just another piece of ethics washing? And how do we get away from the argument that maybe what we don't need is weak ethical self-restraint after the economic crisis? We need law, and we need clear restraint. You made the point, of course, that in parallel you have direct liability of CEOs with this voluntary responsibility. I was interested in how they fit together, and if there are any conflicts between them, in the sense that you're asking the management to manage this control of communication and surveying of their workforce. And I mean, a tail on that would be, you know, what's the difference? There are other surveys out there. What makes your one not just ethics washing? What makes it very, very good? Particularly given the fact that you're only, as I understand it, surveying the employees of these banks. You're not surveying the customers, the wider society, or any of the other stakeholders.
Okay, I'm going to try and quickly respond to those, if I can keep all the points in my head. I'm going to just say a word or two about the diversity point, first of all. Just two or three points on that. Very well established that there is the financial industry generally is very lacking in diversity of all sorts of ways, not just gender and ethnicity, but also in terms of what's going on in people's heads, which is one of the most important kinds of diversity. I always say, when people start proudly presenting me with a room full of people that are, you know, demographically balanced, I say, oh yes, and did you all read the same subject at the same university by any chance? And the answer is quite often yes. So I think on diversity, yes, there are important issues about gender and about ethnicity. Why does that matter? It matters because people need to want to work in a firm, they need to want to see that they can progress in a firm, and also around the table you need to wherever the meeting, whatever level of meeting you're having, you need to want to be able to ensure that you have got different views. I would always caution against just saying, oh well, because the people around the table look different, therefore we can have a big tick in the diversity box. I think one's got to be really challenging about what diversity means. But net, I think we've got to keep having this discussion. On Damien, on your points about isn't this, what was that phrase you used? Ethics washing. Never heard that before, actually. I don't really know how to respond to that, actually, because there's no point me saying, oh no, it isn't. Because I would say that, wouldn't I? I suppose, and I'm going to have to personalise this now in a way. I suppose my only answer to that is, why on earth do you think someone like me, someone like Honora O'Neill, someone like Brendan Barber of the TUC would spend their time doing PR for the banking industry? What's the point? But, we can all get paid doing lots of things. We don't have to do this. So why on earth would one do this? And the idea that, well, we're doing it for the money, you know what? No. So we are all people who have put ourselves sort of on the line to do this. Now, you might say, so what? But I think that's, I could give you all sorts of, reasons for this. But frankly, why would people like us bother to do PR for the banking industry? Why do you think the Governor of the Bank of England would ask people like us to do this? Frankly, we've got other things to do. So that's the only way I can really answer that. And finally, in response to our colleague from China, I was very interested in what you were saying about the labour harvest. And I think the only thing I want to say there is I'd like to understand more about that. So if you're able to stick around at the end, perhaps you could talk to me and my CEO about this, because I'm very interested to hear more. Guy, I've talked rather a lot there, sorry.
I'm very interested because Guy was talking earlier about why this kind of ethics washing may be more effective than regulations. I'm particularly interested in what you had to say on that. I think that's interesting to everybody.
Yeah, why don't we start with ethics washing? The reality is it's all about what you do with the information. You can measure anything you want. And you're absolutely right. If all you do is measure it and you don't do anything with it, it's just a PR stunt. It's what do the people do. And so when we did this, the McKinsey one, I'm sure yours is much better, but it's very similar.
I'm going to talk to you later, Guy, about how you could use ours to be even better.
Well, I might well. That's good. When we did it, we got back information. We had one CEO we fired immediately, and we had two CEOs where what came back was just not good. It basically said that the culture was very, very repressive. The people were scared. They weren't feeling they could express themselves. There wasn't a good teamwork. They didn't trust the firm themselves. What the hell did the customer think? Etc. So the two of them, we said, fine, we want you to work on this, work with your senior management team, then roll it out, and let's see where we are. We retested it. One of them came up enormously. And that made us a little bit suspicious. So we then did some direct conversations with people who filled it in, and we found that basically the senior management team had gone around and told people, if you guys don't get us through this time, you're going to get really bonuses. That was the end of that management team. The other firm, they actually did manage to improve, and it was a slow journey. And the management team had to regain the trust of the people there, and then the people there then had to feel motivated to serve the customer and to bring in the other stakeholders, and we obviously followed it along with that. But we in our McDonald's business, we check what the customer thinks daily. I mean, we're absolutely obsessed with what the customer thinks, and you know, every single restaurant we've got scores. And you know, to put it in perspective, you know, I have 435 McDonald's restaurants with Julia. They evaluate me every year, and it's a 69-page report this year, and it's largely focused on those restaurants within my organisation which aren't achieving the customer scores that we're meant to achieve. Because one bad McDonald's restaurant affects everybody's view. Nobody thinks, oh, it's actually, you know, it's franchise Mr. Smith. They think it's McDonald's. And it's taken them 2 minutes and 30 seconds to get their burger when it should be under 2 minutes. And you know, it's been sitting there for 10 minutes and it's meant to be thrown away after 10 minutes. And you know, we have 5 standards that they've just got to hit. So it's all what you do with the measurement. If there's no action on the measurement, it's just PR and a waste of time.
Yep.
But if you do something, it matters.
Yep.
Going to China, it's exactly the same. You have a leader who's taken a very, very different view from the previous leader. Previous leader was very pro-West, very much about trying to get China economically strong, focusing on Western principles. New leader, we actually need to think about how do we deal with our 1.2 billion people, how do we build our community, how do we do it differently. And so his KPIs are different. And his key performance indicator that you're having to deal with is very tough, because he still wants you to make lots of money, but he also wants you to contribute to society. I don't think that's a bad thing. And you know, to some extent, you know, I think that to me is totally fair. And I don't think it's wrong to say to the banking community, yes, you've got to make money, but yes, you've also got to do other things as well. So I think a mixed system, capitalism and forms of socialism is a good thing, not a bad thing. I think the question is you've got to work out how you do it. And you know, we live in a much more complicated world. It's not about, you know, this is right and this is wrong. It's how do you combine it? And you know, I don't have Solace's view that it's all evil. I have a view that it's very difficult. But you know, if you've got 1.1 billion or 1.2 billion people, you've got to do both. Because otherwise you're going to have revolution. And, you know, that's not a nice thing.
Have you got any thoughts on diversity, Guy, for our final question?
Yes, sorry.
No, I've just got a
Okay.
sort of bit of an eye.
I totally agree with you. I actually think it's essential to have lots of different types of diversity. You're 100% right. I can hire everybody from Imperial College and they'll all be different colours, but the reality is they all have exactly the same intellectual academic skills. So it's important to get people from different areas. You know, we took on someone who's done Teacher First, who taught at Central in an East London school. Totally different view, totally different academic subjects, totally different view. He's really contributed in a different way because he sees things differently. I think diversity is absolutely essential. But my view is it's totally about the profit motive as well. It doesn't just make it a better, more fun place to work. You make far more money if you've got a diverse group of people rather than just getting it all from the same people. But diversity is a lot more than just gender.
Thank you. Now, I saw that there were a lot of other hands shooting up, but I am also conscious I think I ought to allow my speakers to have a drink before their dinner. Because this is the Hands Lecture, anyone who wants to come for a drink in the old hall can, so you can collar the speakers and ask your questions if you want to later on. But I would just like to thank Colette and Guy very much for this talk. Guy has been a very significant part of this college's journey towards diversity, not just in terms of protected characteristics or background and social background, but also in the very broad ways that we encourage people to think across disciplines. These Friday lectures are part of that. Next week's Friday lecture, in conjunction with the Rothermere Institute, is Dr. Sarah Knott talking about her cultural history of motherhood. It's going to be very interesting. do come along, do tell anyone who might be interested. That's 5:30 next Friday. But this has been a fantastic and very interesting talk. And thank you very much, Colette, for coming, and Guy and Julia for your support for college, always.